everyone. Just want to say thank you for coming in and checking out my talk. I really do appreciate it. From what you can expect to see, it's kind of a better understanding. Sorry, my lighting's going a bit crazy here. But you get to understand a bit more about what it means to be a level designer and working in combat, how we can apply these to open world design as well as linear design and really impact the pacing of your levels and missions. So I really do hope you're looking forward to it. Absolute pleasure to be doing this talk for you all. So take care. I'll speak to you all later. Hey everyone, and welcome to my presentation on crafting level design for combat. I'm very excited to be talking to all of you people today and be talking about how best to make sure that you craft a great experience for combat within your level design, and what is it that you should consider when you're actually creating your levels for this. Now, with this as well in mind, I'm going to be going through a few things, so I want you to take away a fair bit from this presentation. So I'm hoping that you'll take away what is the role of level design when it comes to combat. What is it that is our position and how do we best help facilitate it? What is encounter design? What is it that makes a great encounter? How does this mix and collaborate with our position as well? And then finally, think about different kind of steps that we can all prep and best keep in mind for when you're making your encounters. Things that is probably really important for you to plan and consider when you are crafting that of your experience. Before we get into that though, I'll talk to you a bit about my story, who I am, how I've come up with this topic, and how that of combat and encounter design has affected me as well as made me think on my day-to-day basis. For those of you who don't know who I am, I have about over 6.5 years of experience working on a range of different titles from different platforms, from mobile to indie, AAA, working across the world as well. I blog about video games as well as have a podcast discussing that of video games as well. As you can see here, I've worked on many different titles. These are just a few examples. One of the things that I've noticed with a lot of the games that I've worked on is that combat is a big role on it. So I'm going to be talking that on combat and the position of that of a level designer. As you can see, that's me. It's probably far more handsome, that little diagram, than I am in person. But with that in mind, we're going to first talk a bit more on the role of level design. Now, a lot of the times, level design is taking on many different challenges and seeing many different things unfold. One of the role of level design is actually creating that space. We are the architects of this virtual world alongside environment artists. We build playable spaces for the player to interact with, whether that be the castles you see in that of Angry Birds versus the bombastic levels that are in Call of Duty. It is also our role within building these spaces to help guide the player, making sure they understand where they're going, what is they need to do, and where they need to head in order to advance and complete the mission they're actually in. We also control that of the flow of the mission, making sure that the pace feels great, making sure that the player is fully engaged as much as possible when they are playing in the level, and making sure there's time to breathe and there's time for action as well. Not only that, depending at certain places, but you'll most likely be scripting events, whether it be, as I mentioned, Call of Duty earlier, with that of these high-octane Michael Bay explosion moments, or that of the more peaceful, serene in something, say, like Journey, where you'll see creatures moving around the player as well. All of that is to help on the role of level design. But that's not all. As I said, this is primarily the talk about combat, so we need to think of other things when we're talking about that other role of level design. We need to provide choice for the player. Choices not only in how they move through our spaces, but that in how they go through our combat. What kind of options does the player have when they are engaging? Facilitate the combat so that when a player enters a space, they know that this is entirely for combat. They know when they need to duck and dodge and move through. Provide cover in order for the player to feel safe and move through, as well as crafting an experience that keeps the player engaged within, as well as making sure that we keep the combat fresh and entertained and we do not bore them with what's going on and what action is that going around them. So now that we've got a bit of an understanding of what is it level design does and kind of how we fit in the role of combat, let's talk about what is an encounter, as I'm sure some of you may already know, but for those who don't, we will be talking about what that is. Now, encounters are very different per game as well. It's not going to be just all, one shoe size fits all. There needs to be things that you need to know before creating an encounter. You need to understand the 3 C's of your game. That is character, combat, and controls. Making sure that you know these in order to move through correctly in crafting an overall great experience. Because once you know these will help then guide you on the decisions that you'll make as a level designer. Understanding what actual weaponry and mechanics are available, as different kind of mechanics and weapons will affect the space that you're crafting. So think about what is that you can use to help ensure what is going on. And this also reflects the enemy types as well. As games have advanced, we know that there are different types of enemies to keep that of encounters fresh. And then understanding again the perfect ranges. We have the ruler on this diagram here showing the ranges when the player is at the top here versus down below, understanding metrically how to best use those spaces. Now with that said, an encounter, and once you have actually studied your own game and also understanding what it is, you'll know that encounter is an interaction with NPCs. Encounters normally are that of such things as combat. They can also be boss encounters as well, or maybe kind of more time trial ones with cars. But for this talk, we're going to be focusing on that on solely of combat encounters. Now, with this, they will be a very important thing is that they are well-crafted experiences. They're not just random shootouts on a street. They have a flow to them, almost like a choreographed dance in a sense. Now, obviously, the player has control, but it's not them you're trying to control. It's the area around them to make it feel that this combat feels fresh and also innovative, as well as making sure that the player is feeling that pressure when they want to, or being pulled in to go further and deeper into the fight. Not only that, but these are often used as key beats within the mission. We're going to be talking a little bit about pacing a bit later on, but like we mentioned just earlier, boss encounters can be very prevalent as well within this, as well as just combat to help build up the tension as well as relieve tension within that space. Now, where can encounters be found? They can be found in many places, such as the main missions, whether this be the opening start where the player may be dropped into hostile territory and fight their way out of it, making sure that it sets the tone overall of what the encounter is going to be like. Or maybe you won't go through this main mission and find a combat encounter till halfway through, showing that at the beginning it was all about stealth, it was all about building up to see who really was the main villain, to then have it all come unraveling. Now, games have advanced quite a bit, so you won't just find it in that of main missions, but you'll also find it within the open world as well. Sometimes, as we know, to fill such spaces, we fill them with combat encounters. So when the player is roaming throughout their spaces, they'll actually find certain enemies going around, kind of pulling the players in, as well as giving the players a chance to learn about their own skills and weaponry that you'll find in such open world games such as Division 2 or Destiny 2. Now, I spoke a little bit about pacing, but as you can see by this chart, combat often brings up the pacing. It adds those high octane moments, those moments where the player has to make sure that they're on their best game in order to be able to deliver the cool moments of taking out enemies. Because if not, then it can become quite a dangerous experience. Now, what I'm showing here with this pacing graph is that you can see different kinds of gameplay have a different kind of effect on that of the mission as well. Whether it be those more sort of less interactive scenes compared to traversing, compared that to combat or even reaching the objective. You can see how this has a different pace on the mission or in the open world. So this is important for us to understand, because with this in mind, we need to know that when is it the right time to add our combat, when is it that we need to, like I mentioned, add those moments to raise up the pace to make sure we've now got the player's attention and hook them on. So it's important to keep that in mind about where to place that within your mission or within your open world. So what we can take away from this is that an encounter is a well-crafted combat experience, that you're creating something that the player will be interacting with very heavily and be thinking about on a very, very strong level, making sure that they know what's going ahead of them, as well as surprising them and making sure that they are engaged by what is within this. So who is responsible for creating these very well scripted events? Well, this can range from different teams. Some companies have that of encounter or combat teams, as they're known as. These will be the people that really sit down and work with AI as well as the gameplay teams to discuss such things as best uses for that of certain enemy types or certain weaponries or mechanics that are involved with combat. So they're the ones to help understand this and start to prepare for the rest of the team knowledge and information of how to best handle these experiences, how to best make sure that you take advantage of the weaponry and the skills available to that of the player and the enemies as well. And it also falls on us, level designers, making sure that we take the information from that of the encounter team and give it the proper space that's needed to really flourish into something that becomes memorable. So it's important to know that communication between these teams is super important, because we need to make sure that we understand what's going on from their side to help craft that best experience. So we've learned that encounters are well crafted combat spaces that need a real amount of detail, because they're the ones that are going to be memorized with the player, and we don't want them to just think about combat as in just endless waves of dull, drab, one-shot, two-shot kill enemies. It helps the importance of the overall pacing of the experience. As we mentioned, if we want to make it feel like an ambush, then we set the combat right away, versus that of when we're trying to, slowly creep in the information there. It's responsibility of multiple teams. Something like a game never just comes from one person or one team. It comes from multiple people working together. So making sure that communication is really key in order to bring something the best to life. As I say, teamwork makes the dream work. So do make sure that you are including your team as well as gaining as much information as you can from them. Now, with that said, and talking about encounter design teams and encounters, I'm going to be talking about some of the best kind of level design tips I've learned from my experience. Now, due to time, we can't go through all of them, but I'll be going through a few of them in order to help you understand and hopefully give you some new things for you to think about in order to put in and to make sure that your game and level have some of the best combat moments. First of all, as we mentioned about understanding your 3 C's, you should also understand your metrics as well. These are the foundations for crafting great levels. We need to make sure that these are universal, because that way, when you're working in a team with other level designers, we all know this and knows what is it that works, and making sure that they all match up and line up for this. This needs to be done before you even start thinking about blocking out. Now, it'll be normally an important role for one of the designers to actually create a gym. Now, a gym in the terms of game creation is that of a space where you can test and craft small kind of encounter spaces to test out what happens. In here, with this example here, we have a gym which testing different cover here. So that way we can use it to test what works best within this gym for that of the covers and props as well. Not only is metrics important for that, but I just mentioned cover. There's a lot of things that we need to be thinking about with cover, especially when it comes to range combat. Now, we need to understand that cover can change the feeling of a space as well, and feeling of power and safety within the space. So you'll be thinking about half and low cover that players will need to crouch to take cover on, so they're not fully standing, but this way they can still see what's going on, but still are slightly more exposed and feel less safe. Within the contrast of that of the full height cover as well. This is something that the player can actually stand behind completely. Now, there are some drawbacks in that, in the fact that you can't aim over like you can in half and low cover, but you are much safer. So it's important for you to get these metrics right from the beginning, so that way the overall experience feels safer, and also what is going to be readable for the player to use in order to take advantage of cover, so that they don't get frustrated by a space not knowing what is able for them to use in order to be safe. Now, not only is cover metrics important for this, but also cover spacing. Now this is also known as the buffer zone, cover spacing buffer zone. It is all the same thing. What you'll find with this though is that this is important for a few different reasons. It helps you move the player, because it's easy, and I'm sure we've all experienced it, where someone just camps because they know they're in a great space and will just take everyone out. But in that of our encounter designs, where it's more about a single player taking on AI, we need to help create good cover spacing to help pull the player in certain directions, help them feel like they're taking the advantage, that they're moving up in the space. Not only that, it helps the space feel readable. As I mentioned in the previous slide, you need to make sure that your cover metrics are correct. So that way when the player looks, they instantly know which cover they can use, or should I say, what is cover for them to use. And not only that, it helps them strategize. It helps them plan where to move if someone is trying to flank them, as well as where can they go to maybe even take a flanking position. Now in here, whoops, that's a little bit early. But in here you can see this space I've created in Unity for a bit of a combat design. In this example, my cover spacing is 3 meters. This way it helps pull players in. I actually experimented with 2 meters, but it didn't feel like it was far enough, so players wouldn't actually advance and take over that. Instead, they'd just use the strength of this doorway or door frame we see here. So by having different spaces moved around, we now know what is the closest to us, what is further away but may offer greater cover, such as high cover as we mentioned before, and what strategies we can even use to take advantage for flanking, so the player can come down here and then move down this space as well. By having these kind of spaces, it helps us. But not only that, it will help with technical issues as well, as sometimes cameras can clip through things. And also, when you see this as well, by having cover spacing, it creates views of instant paths. If I had one that was just 1 meter apart, you wouldn't think that that's a route, an entrance. But by having the spacing as well, we know that they can do this. They can use this opening to advance. And here you can see again that representation of the cover space, the buffer zone. Now, metrics is a very big and important topic, and that's why I'm going on about it in a few different areas, because of the fact that it's not often spoken about really in detail, yet it's one of the very first things that goes down when creating a game. Now, as you can see, I've just got this example of the character I used in that previous example of like the overall Unity scale, so I know how big this character is. Now, not only does it help with our cover, as I mentioned, but it helps with our architectural design as well. One of the things that we help to demonstrate to players and help communicate with players is such things as main paths. So we know that maybe a path that is 5 meters long, roughly, in terms of dead space, there could be such things as cover eating up into this. But 5 meters knows that the player can read this as this is the main path. This is probably where I'll follow in order to go through to a new objective, in order to progress through the mission. If we compare that to more of a side path, which is 2 meters thinner, then maybe we know that this leads to something like a side objective, some loot, or even that of a flanking route itself. By playing on these can then subconsciously communicate with the player in order for them to take advantage of your layout. So make sure they're kept clear. And when anything, whether it be the cover or that of the architect space, you need to make sure that the contrast is clear and visible. You can't just change things by a few centimeters, because trust me, in any perspective, the player will not know the difference between 10 to 20 centimeters. Make sure the difference is big enough within meters so the player can help understand and read that space. Next is that of weapon range. These are metrics as well, and these will come information normally from either the gameplay or the encounter team. This is very important because you may want a mission which introduces new archetypes of enemies, a new weapon, so you need to know this in order to best facilitate your space with this. Such things as pistols might range from 10 to 15 meters, or shotguns could go from 5 to 10, and even that of assault rifles going further. All of these are important because it helps to again craft a different experience. You knowing that if you want the player to to take that more of a sniper route, then you need to know that you have your spawn point of enemies, say 30 to 40 meters away, having more kind of cover sparse leading it, again forcing them to use that long range weapon. Well, if you want the player to take advantage of shotgun and close range weaponry, then you will create a space with using more cover in order for the player or the enemy to get closer and get the stages up in order to best facilitate the shotgun, as this is not, most damaging at say something like 20 meters, but deals a heck of a lot of damage of that at 5 to 10 meters. Again, by communicating with your team, you'll gain the best information to help sell and help put together a great combat space. So these things are important. Next is that of decision points. Now, a decision point is that where the player can get an understanding of the space, allows them to understand what is the challenge in front of them. Maybe able to strategize as well, build a plan for this. A decision point is often a space where the player will get into before jumping right into combat. Again, this will depend on that of the overall narrative of your mission, but what is great with this is that, again, this allows for the player to, again, see what's in front of them, to take in that information. However, there's a few things that you should keep in mind when you are creating your own decision points. Make sure that this is not the perfect camp spot, because if the player, for example, sees this, then they won't be able to, they would prefer not to move. If they know they can just gun down enemies, then they'll just do that, they'll stop there. So we need to help make sure that this decision point is great for strategizing, but they need to push forward. So we need to encourage movement. So a couple of things that you can do with this. With the one at the bottom here, I have no cover for the player. So the enemies may have their backs to them, but the player knows if they were to shoot from this position, the enemies could actually run and take cover on these, while the player has no cover, forcing them to get down. Now, as you can see, what might be wrong here with this is this looks like a great solution, or should we say a great spot for the player just to hang around in. Now we can counter that by putting bulletproof glass here, so we know that when the player, comes to try use it, they can't shoot through it, so they have to move forward. As well, we could put an entrance which leads around to this as well, so that way there is a flanking route for the enemies. But do keep in mind that decision points are very, very important, because it helps when the player gets into a new space, they can understand how the space works. As well as what I say with decision points is make sure you don't reveal everything to the player. Say for example, there might be some enemies further down here that the player can't see. So that way it's not the perfect strategy for them, so you keep them on their toes and surprise the players. Another one is that the first enemy should be an easy win. That players feel really strong. One of the things that you find in multiplayer combat games is that we have these rewards for kill streaks to make the players feel like badass for just doing a great service of just, killing 3 to 5 people. Now, when you get against AI, we can't necessarily do that, but we do want to create that same momentum moving forward to encourage players to move through. So what's important is you make sure that the first enemy is super easy to kill. Maybe they've just got their back to the enemy, so they don't even go on patrols, they're very static. Or maybe they move away from the enemy. Something like that instantly gives them an opportunity to be able to take out the enemy before moving forward. One of the next things is keep in mind that your objective is not to beat the player. Now, we'll see this in Mario Maker, is that a lot of the times, I don't know if you've seen it as well, but a lot of the levels that are created and get the most attention from Mario Maker are these crazy ones. And I think this one was created by an actual LD who was trying to make a point, because the layout is the exact same for that of 1-1. But they added all these crazy, flame spinning of death. But it's one of those things which is true to all of us and new people coming up. Your objective isn't to punish the player. Your objective is to challenge the player. There are two very different things. We want the player to feel proud that they overcame it. They may die 1 or 2 times, that's fine. But as long as they feel that they've made the mistake when dying, not that you've just thrown in 100 of these spinning fireballs of death, then that's the most important thing. Another thing is that you provide choice. That can be choice in terms of where to go with different paths, or choice of weaponry. In this example of the Overwatch in King's Row, when you come to your starting point, you'll notice that you have a few different routes to go to the objective. And that's that choice there, that choice where the player feels that this is meaningful and impactful to help with flanking routes, as well as giving them a chance to explore within the combat as well. And it really helps give the player that sense of agency that they are in control of the level and space around them. Now, the next one is know your fronts. For those of you, fronts, it may not be clear, but front is basically setting up a line to understand, or not necessarily a line, but an arrangement of cover that allows the player to understand what's about to happen. That's why a lot of us will notice in certain spaces, before the music will even change, combat's about to happen here. That's because it is a clear elevation of where the fronts are. If you create a space where it's all higgledy-piggledy and just cover placed everywhere, the player will have no idea about what's going on and where things are about to go. But if we have more crafted and structured, we know that this can help guide players and also understand where they need to go to advance with the story, to advance with this combat in order to complete it. Now, with that in mind, one of the great things that Gears does a great example of is they have these ones where the player will push up and there'll be this turret and they have to, overcome this overwhelming odds to then, once they conquer this space, they'll end up changing the front. So now they may have that turret and then blasting enemy reinforcements coming in. One of the things that's great for that is the fact that the player has already got a sense of the level. They already kind of understand where the best routes are, where is it that they took cover on. So when the player sees it from a different perspective, they can call upon that memory, that mental map they've already made in order to take out the enemies coming in. What I think is also important is making sure that you mix up your cover height. We talked about cover metrics before, about different kinds of heights and how they kind of affect the player's safety. But with mixing up the cover heights, for example, in this picture, low cover is orange and then high cover is this dark blue. By mixing these up, it can help make the space feel kind of different, safer, and knowing to give what gives the advantage to the player and to the enemies. By mixing this up, it can help change up where the combat flows from. Can the player shoot over or shoot to the side? It's a really good thing to think about. Not only are you mixing up the cover height, but you should also mixing up that of the elevation as well. This can be the role of the elevation for the player or the role of the elevation of the enemy. Because one thing that you'll notice is it's easier to shoot down than it is up. It's much quicker, you'll find. So whoever is at the lower ground is often at a disadvantage, and you can really use that to help sell that of narrative as well. If we want the player, for example, to feel like they're going within the depths of hell, then maybe we have it where they're moving further, going lower and lower in the combat. But if we want the player to feel that they're trying to make a triumphant escape, then we make them charge, and each time they go up and up, pushing through the enemies who once had that high advantage, but now the player has reclaimed it. All of these can help create a different feeling within the space that we're creating. Now that there is just some of the LD tips there. There are many more out there, but as I said, due to time, these are just the few things. So as you know, a lot goes into creating these combat encounters. A lot of things that we need to make sure that we keep in mind when we're designing these. So do experiment with this. You're not going to get these right first time. As I mentioned, there's going to be some information that you'll need as well to craft. And sometimes that information will come a little bit later, but do stay diligent in order to get that information. Communicate with teams. As I mentioned before, this is what will help create a better space, because as we know as well, when you're working with environment art, they might change things up to help better with a more artistic composition. So with that, we need to make sure that we communicate what's important and why it's important. And obviously make sure that you do play test this as often as possible, because you're not going to be able to know how good it is just by you creating it and leaving it. You have to play test to make it better. And as well, get other people to play test it, because when you have a fresh pair of eyes, they might not interact with it or how you thought they did. And that flanking route that is so clear to you may not be to someone else. So keep that in mind. So I just want to say thank you all very, very much. I hope you have enjoyed this talk. I hope that you've learned something from it. So again, thank you for coming to this presentation and listening to it. And yeah, thank you all very much. I hope you, like I said, you have learned and you've taken anything away. Okay, everyone, take care, and I'll catch you all next time.